we all know that number is going to be 25,000. We really are at the very tip of the iceberg. So what's the job of an evangelist? It's simple. It's to advance the cause, in this case, advance the cause of Customer Success Nation. That's why we've gathered here today. And how do you advance the cause? Simple. You share stories with each other, talk about best practices, and roll up your sleeve or your leg and show your scars, right? This is what we're here for. This room today is the proof that customer success folks want to gather together so that they can talk to each other. When I worked at Marketo, we had a saying that we kind of lived by, and that was, our job was to give marketing a seat at the table. I think our job in customer success is the same one. So what do we mean when we said the seat at the table? What that means is the table is where the big boys sit. This is where the real decisions are made, right? Where people talk about profits and profit contribution and revenue and bookings and forecasts and things like that. That's the table that we need to pull up our chairs to as well. I mean, we're responsible for revenue and bookings, and we are forecasting renewals and things like that. So we ought to not sit at the kids' table at Thanksgiving dinner anymore, but pull up our chairs to the big boys' table. And by the way, the big boys' table is also where the people sit who get paid real bonuses. So raise your hand if you're up for coming on board the big table. And so, thank you. So you can reject the title of evangelist, and you can hop off the train if you're not interested, but that's where it's going. So I say to everybody, all aboard. So speaking of movements, raise your hand if you know who this person is. There's a few hands up. Now, if you're a history buff or you're over 40 years old, it probably at least looks somewhat familiar, right? You may not be able to place the name, but don't worry about that. 1980 was a long time ago. So hands up again if you think you know who this is or you're sure. Wow, it grew. You guys were whispering to each other. So keep your hands up if you were right. All right, congratulations. There are a few people who knew. So the question in your mind now is, why in the world is there a picture of Lech Wałęsa up on a screen at our Pulse conference? Well, we're talking about movements, right? So I'm going to give those who didn't have their hands up a little bit of a history lesson. So Lech Wałęsa was an electrician and an activist for workers' rights back in the 70s in Poland. If you guys know a little bit about the 70s in a country like Poland, being an activist was probably not a great occupation because governments didn't like that kind of thing. So in the 1970s, Lech Wałęsa was arrested several times and quote unquote laid off from a number of jobs as well because of his activism. In 1980, he participated in a strike at a shipyard in Gdansk, Poland. That was the most famous kind of moment of the Polish movement called Solidarity. And then at the end of that strike, he negotiated the first ever trade agreement between a workers' union and a communist government. And the movement became known worldwide as Solidarity. Now I want to ask this question. If we had a chance to go back and look at Lech Wałęsa's to-do list sometime in the 1970s, do you think on that list somewhere would say, start a movement, or win a Nobel Prize, or become president of Poland, or knock down the Berlin Wall, or destroy the Soviet Union? I don't think so. I think the only thing that you might see if he had a to-do list was help my coworkers, right? Because he wasn't trying to start a movement. All he was doing was trying to turn his little corner of the world into a better place to work. And the reason that I'm talking about that is because we're in that same place today where we're in the midst of a movement, but we're also paying homage to those who started that movement. So the question now is, who's the Lech Wałęsa of the customer success movement? Who was the first person who either decided or had their boss say to them, I need you to go make sure your customers are using our products so that they'll renew their contracts? Anybody know? Anybody know who the first customer success manager was? Would you like to know? Anybody want to know? So would I. Sorry. So there is a finder's fee, and we will make this person semi-famous. They'll be on this stage next year at Pulse. So if you know who that is, please let me know. My guess is it's someone who was at Salesforce or maybe NetSuite 11, maybe 12 years ago. But it might go back further than that. It could go back to the very first SaaS company in 1995. Here's another history lesson and a quiz for you. Does anyone know who the first SaaS company was? There's probably a lot of debate about this. Nobody's hand is up. It wasn't Salesforce. It was a company called ViaWeb in 1995 that got sold or bought by Yahoo and became Yahoo Store. So it's possible the first customer success manager worked at ViaWeb. I've tried to contact a few people who were there early on, but I haven't heard anything back. Sometimes LinkedIn works, sometimes it doesn't. They probably think I'm trying to sell them something. Anyway, so anyone with any knowledge of the whereabouts of this person, please inform the authorities. So let's talk a little bit about the tsunami. Nick referred to this as well. You guys are all completely aware of this, so I'm preaching to the choir. But the tsunami really started, I think, with SaaS. But it's not just SaaS. It's really become something a little bit more than that, and that is the pay-as-you-go world, right? That includes things like Amazon, web services, Google AdWords, et cetera. Anything where you can stop paying if you're not happy and move on, right? So the tsunami has happened, and it's basically turned our technical world upside down, right? It's really changed the way things are being done, and I think, without question, it's here to stay. And just to reinforce that idea, I'm going to take a quick poll. So we've got a room full of entrepreneurs here in the middle of Silicon Valley, so I think this is potentially a legitimately scientific poll. So if you were starting a software company tomorrow, raise your hand if it would be a SaaS company or have a subscription model. Raise your hand if that's the kind of software company. So there's a couple people sound asleep whose hands weren't up, but everybody else had their hands up. So I'm telling you that the number was exactly 100%, right? That's the world we live in today. You're either SaaS or you're becoming SaaS, or you're either pay-as-you-go or you're becoming pay-as-you-go. So for those who need a stat, you probably don't, but for those who need a stat to kind of reinforce this idea, I have a number for you. 3.2 billion. That's dollars, and that's the amount of money that SAP paid to become a SaaS company when they bought SuccessFactors. And that was only the beginning. It probably wasn't even the beginning. It's just the biggest number. Oracle followed suit quickly after buying Taleo and now Eloqua, and this has just begun. Believe me, we've only just begun. So many of you are from California, and those who aren't have probably had the privilege of standing on the beach and watching the waves roll in. And one of the things you've probably noticed is that when there's a particularly big wave, the power and magnitude of that wave sucks behind it some other big waves as well. Not as big as the first, but bigger than a normal wave. Not as powerful as the first either, but powerful nonetheless. And that's where we are today. We're at the front, of a really big wave that has to do with customer success, right? So if you look at this chart, look at this Venn diagram, and think back 20 years. The Venn part of this diagram was just a sliver, if at all, right? Because customer success and vendor success were not necessarily linked together. Today, it's much larger, but we all know 2 or 3 years from now, the Venn slice of this diagram is going to even be larger than this. And we're all leading the way because our success as companies is inextricably linked today to our customers' success. It really is life or death. Gone are the days of collecting $3 million up front and then not really caring all that much about whether your customer is successful. So I say welcome to a much better world where we must make our customers successful. So history's full of movements. We all know some of these. And every movement has a seminal moment. Wars are movements, and they all have seminal battles, right? Valley Forge, Gettysburg, Normandy. Rock and roll was a movement. And everybody probably knows what the seminal moment for rock and roll was. Anybody shout it out? Anybody there? Was anybody there? Woodstock, of course. And for sure, everybody knows what the seminal moment of the space race movement was, right? If you're like me, well, some of you weren't born then, but if you're like me, you sat probably in front of a black and white TV and watched on July 20th of 1969 when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. The seminal moment of the Solidarity movement was when the Berlin Wall fell on November 9th of 1989. That day was not the beginning of the movement, nor was it the end. The Soviet Union hadn't even begun to crumble at the time. And it wasn't a day that Lech Wałęsa envisioned when he started organizing his workers in Poland. But it is the day that we all remember. Similarly, we here in this room did not start the customer success movement, and it's certainly not complete, not by any means. It may not be as important as the fall of the Berlin Wall, but make no mistake about it, we are tearing down walls. And if you don't believe that, find your colleagues at SAP and Oracle and Adobe and Autodesk and ask them if anything's changing inside their companies. They will tell you that it is. It's a different world, and they all know, like we do, that it's adapt or die. So friends, today is our day. I doubt any of you were on Normandy Beach. I know you didn't walk on the moon, and nobody admitted to being at Woodstock. But you're all here today, and I'm telling you right now, May 30th, 2013 will forever be known as the seminal moment of the customer success movement. So congratulations on being a part of it. And get out your noisemakers.